Puts me so much trouble, it's not my fault. All this I also lose my friends, I lost my baby. That is looking cry, only today want to change. He wanted us, so they couldn't try more like to feel. I'd kill the real, take your life in a second. The table drinks coffee in my kitchen, I mentioned in every song, I just wanted to go away. You decide to stay in the well. I want to be forgiven, I don't like this kid for money. Sorry I was scared, you're not the way it feels. Like to sleep waiting for someone to come in and kill you. The final thing is that now I'm not afraid of anything. Cause they gonna kill anyone that feels so powerful. They try by you every your skin of everything is confusing. You will be good, but you will be more. You will be good, but you will be more. You will be good, but you will be more. Alone every day, it is a praise of pleasure.
Good morning and welcome to Dynasty 365, where the film will set you free. Today we're going to be going over DK Metcalf's situation in Seattle to see how much first-year opportunity and long-term potential production he has. And then we're also going to talk a little about how to sell your fantasy football friends on Dynasty. You can't talk about the receivers in Seattle without mentioning Doug Baldwin. There's a lot of rumors that he's going to be retiring before the start of the season. I still think he has one more year at least left in him. He's never been the most athletic person and relies on his brain and route running savvy more than anything else. One reason I don't see him retiring is the timing of his surgeries. I don't understand why he'd have them so quickly into the offseason and so close together if he truly was retiring. You can look at those surgeries as a bad thing or a good thing. You could say, well, he was hurt and had surgery, so it's a bad thing. You could also say, well, they had a surgery to fix the physical issue that was plaguing him. But with these surgeries, there's always an uncertainty of his future performance, and apparently his career with the Seahawks continuing. He's either going to fall apart or it's going to turn out that he fixed his nagging issues and he's fine. And honestly, probably better than he was last year when he was playing through those injuries. The other reason I don't think he's retiring is DK Metcalf does not play the slot in any way. Gary Jennings does, and he was picked in the 4th round, but he is so bad at blocking right now that throwing him into a run-first offense as a slot doesn't really seem like a good idea, and he was in my tier 4 wide receivers. I did like some things I saw with Gary Jennings, but I simply can't imagine a world in which he's ready to go week 1 as a slot receiver or on the outside. But either way, last year Doug Baldwin missed 3 games, and if he does retire, that opens up 73 targets, which isn't a ton. Baldwin also didn't decline in his catch percentage, his yards per route, his yards per target, or his yards per touch compared to the last 2 or 3 seasons. But when you look at his overall stats year by year, his yards and touchdowns and catches, you do see a ramp up and then a plateau and then a decline, indicating that he is on the back half of his career. I would just be pretty shocked if it's at 30. With his mental dominance of the game. They've also got Tyler Lockett, who had an insanely efficient year in 2018 with 17 yards per route, 14 yards per target, and 15 yards per touch. He had an 81% catch percentage, which is very high for any wide receiver, and he also had 10 touchdowns on only 73 targets, which to me seems very unsustainable. The difference in yards per touch compared to yards per target shows that he is a speed and a yards after the catch type of player more than he is a possession guy, which if you've seen him play is clearly evident. The other significant wide receiver they've got is David Moore, who I've seen being talked up a little bit, but really he's nothing more than a contested catch specialist who had a 49% catch rate last year and only saw 53 targets. There's no one else of note there. There are some names people throw around, but honestly, they're Jags. They did add 4 rookies, which would be an indicator that they're preparing at the least for life without Baldwin. But again, I'd be very surprised if he's not playing this year. They added Gary Jennings, Jazz Ferguson, who is a big, tall, agile, but troubled receiver. John Ursua, who I've never seen, and I haven't watched his film yet, in the 7th round. I believe Jazz Ferguson was an undrafted free agent. And Terry Wright, who I've never heard of, who's an undrafted free agent. So it's not like they went hot and heavy at the wide receiver position. They saw value in Metcalf and traded up. Then they got, in my opinion, a long-term project in Gary Jennings and took a couple of flyers on a 7th round receiver and undrafted free agents. At tight end, they've got Will Dissly, who was having a pretty good start to the season last year, especially for a rookie, but he had a torn patellar tendon, I believe. I did not look it up, but that seems right to me, which seems like a pretty devastating injury to a tight end. But he was doing well with 20 yards per route, 20 yards per touch, and 11 yards per target. Again, that yards per touch being almost double the yards per target points to a yards after catch type of tight end. Nick Vannett is just a guy, as evidenced by his 9 yards per route, 9 yards per touch, and 6 yards per target. At running back, Mike Davis went to the Bears, who saw 43 targets. So let's say Doug Baldwin does retire, and we know Mike Davis left. That's 116 targets from last year that aren't there this year. So that's a decent amount. That's some opportunity, but we still don't know if Doug Baldwin is staying or going, which is true about Tyreek Hill. I will give the Miko 101 doubters that, but I find it an order of magnitude more likely that Tyreek Hill is not a Chief than Doug Baldwin is not a Seahawk in 2019. Chris Carson saw only 24 targets in the passing game with a respectable 8 yards per route and 7 yards per target with an above average 83% catch rate. The most overdrafted player last year, Rashad Penny, got only 12 targets with 8 yards per route and 6 yards per target with a catch percentage of 75%. Now his role will probably grow in the passing game, so that also takes some of those 116 targets that would be vacated by Baldwin and Mike Davis leaving to Penny. Clearly at quarterback, they have Russell Wilson. He just signed a mega deal. He had 35 touchdowns last year and 111 quarterback rating. Over the last 3 or 4 years, he averages about 4,000 yards and 31 touchdowns through the air. He's an above average passer for an NFL quarterback, but his passing ability is overrated significantly by the average fan, and he's definitely not elite in the passing arena. The Seahawks were 6th to last in passing yards per game, but they had the 5th highest passing touchdowns per game, which is also kind of displayed in their total offense, which was 18th in yards, but 6th in points per game scored. In the NFL last year, the Seahawks were last in passing attempts per game. Part of that is due to the Seahawks O-line being atrocious in pass protection, being ranked 30th, but Wilson does have elite elusivity, and that's clearly a strategic decision that the Seahawks have made on not prioritizing the offensive line. They were pretty good in run blocking, being 12th in creating yards for the running back and 5th in power, which clearly bodes well for Chris Carson and his borderline elite vision. On a side note, if someone in your league is trying to move out from Chris Carson because they're scared of Rashad Penny, whatever price they're asking is probably a pretty good price to buy at. But I'm not too up on his value, so I guess temper that a little bit. But I guess what I'm saying is that he's underrated, and I don't think he's a flash in the pan. His running style does concern me a little, but it is effective. Their line was in the top half in all of the other run metrics, and they only added a 4th round guard in the draft, so I don't see any of those numbers changing all that much. The overall offense was 19th in the NFL in yards per drive, 7th in points per drive. They were middle of the pack in time of possession per drive, and they were the most run-heavy team by far, with 55.6% of their plays being runs, which is 4.6% more than the Titans, who, if you heard the episode the other day, yesterday actually, were 2nd place, and the Titans were only 1.4% more than the 3rd place team. So they were the most run-heavy team by a significant amount. The head coach is Pete Carroll, who talks up every single player like Chris Collinsworth does. In my opinion, he makes pretty questionable decisions, both in personnel and strategy and calling games. To me, he's an overrated coach. He just has a lot of name recognition. He's not horrible, but he's not an advantage or an offensive genius. So what does DK Metcalf bring to the table that can fit into this Seattle offense? He was my pre-draft wide receiver 2 at 6 foot 3.5 inches, 228 pounds, 9.875 inch hands, and around an 83 inch wingspan. He was top 5 in weight divided by height, 1st in the class in span divided by height, and still a respectable 14th in hand size divided by height. At the combine, he ran a blazing 4.3340, an above average 40.5 inch vertical, a far above average 134 inch broad jump, and was tied for most reps in the class with 27 on the bench. Those are ridiculous numbers for a human being, a wide receiver, to do at 6'3.5", 228 pounds with long arms. The concerning thing that every single person on planet Earth knows about him is that he ran a 7.38 second 3-cone drill. He did improve that to a 7.25 at his pro day, but it's still below what people would like to see, and he ran a concerning 4.5 20-yard shuttle as well. The good things that DK shows on film are his breakaway speed, great acceleration, great play strength. He's got great balance and jukes during his release. He doesn't have great balance all the time, but during his initial release, he does. He has the best inside release in the entire draft class. He's enormous, obviously, and he has good bloodlines with, I believe, his father and several of his uncles having played professional sports as well. Now, none of these prospects are perfect, which is also why this rookie draft class is so hard to nail down the rookie draft order. I mean, except for me, but we can't all be me. So anyways, the bad things. He's got below average change of direction. He ran a super limited route tree at Ole Miss. He does show drops on film, both contested and wide open. He's got the injury history, which to me seems a little fluky, but you still never like to see multiple season-ending injuries for a wide receiver in college, especially when he's not being asked to carry too much of the offensive load. And because of those injuries, he doesn't have as much on-field experience as a lot of these other wide receivers that are coming out this year. So the million-dollar question, how will he do this season and the future? Remember, he's in a run-first, decent to above-average offense. Not a lot of yards, but they do score. He could easily be first or second on that team in targets year one. But remember, they don't throw that often, so it's not that many targets. He is simply too big, fast, and physical for most teams in the NFL number one cornerback to handle. So I'm not even all that concerned that he'll see number one coverage. Will it limit him at first? Yeah, but he's big, fast, has great releases, and he'll fight the defensive back. And with his strength, I don't think it's going to be too hard for him to figure out how to get open early in a route. And he can use that long speed to separate, especially on play action. Unless that 3-cone drill is so damning, which I think is probably the most overrated thing about him. I'm far more worried about his inability to stay healthy when he wasn't asked to do a lot in college. I think his value is almost certain to increase over the year. They will take shots. Wilson will throw deep. He will scramble. He will find ways to allow Metcalf to use that 4.33 speed, and they will find chunk plays. Right now, he's their biggest target by far. Unless Will Dissly can get healthy, he could see a lot of red zone targets. So while I don't think he's going to get a lot of yards, I do think he'll have enough touchdown upside to be a startable asset in his first season, which is what you're looking for in the first round. Sitting on that guy for a full year is almost certain to just decrease his value. If he's seeing the field and getting touchdowns, even if it's hard to predict when they happen, his value will increase, especially with their very weak depth at wide receiver outside of Tyler Lockett, combined with his crazy athletic traits. I believe he has unrivaled upside in this class as an individual player, except for Mecole Hardman, which is due in a large part to his situation. I see zero problem with taking DK in the first half of rookie first-round drafts, as long as you're aware that the first-year production will most likely be sporadic, and that there really aren't that many targets to go around, especially if Doug Baldwin comes back, as I believe he will. Now let's talk about how to sell Dynasty to your typical friends that maybe aren't into fantasy football, but they're into two things, or have an interest in two things. Football in general, and Pokemon. Now, I'm sure not all of you have played Pokemon or like Pokemon, but I love Pokemon. I find it a super relaxing, fun game to play. Like, I'll be playing different versions of Pokemon probably throughout my life. It's just such a great stress reliever for me. But what I equate Dynasty Fantasy Football to are real-life Pokemon that actually fight each other in real life in front of your eyes. They evolve by learning new techniques and becoming better players. They get hurt, just like when your Pokemon is poisoned or paralyzed. Your real-life players faint just like Pokemon when they're suspended or injured. The only difference with Dynasty from Pokemon is that your human Pokemon can die. By that I mean they either retire or, as is sad in some scenarios, they do physically die. So if you've played Pokemon, you know that when you enter a new area, there are new Pokemon to be caught. I would call this the rookie draft. You have the opportunity to add new players to your team that you didn't have access to before now. In each new area, you have the potential to grab a number of different Pokemon to help your team, but you have to select the ones that will help your team the most, specifically where you're the weakest. In Pokemon World, this is their base stats and gender and how many different evolutions they can still go through. And in the rookie draft, that's the overall talent level of these prospects. Your Pokemon also have a type, like fire or water or earth. So fire is going to be good against the grass Pokemon. The grass Pokemon is going to be good against the water Pokemon. And the water Pokemon is going to be good against the fire Pokemon if you've never played before. They also have different moves that each Pokemon can learn and do. In Dynasty, those are the positions that these human Pokemon play and the skill sets that they currently have and show the ability to grow into or evolve into in the future. So that was just a funny little shower thought I had the other day when I was thinking about why do I love Dynasty so much? And that honestly is the answer. One of the goals for me is to bring more people into playing Dynasty. A lot of people don't like the negative consequences that come when your poor decisions come back to bite you in the ass. But millions and millions of people were playing Pokemon Go, and millions of people around the world love Pokemon. So I figure if you could find the intersection of people that enjoy Pokemon and enjoy football, there's a much larger pool of potential Dynasty players that you can bring into the game. And if they can speed up the learning curve, I believe they're more likely to stay and grow the game, which means more players, which means more listeners, and so on. So let me know what you think about that analogy. I think it's a pretty good one, but let me know if you've got a better video game or board game or something like that that you would equate to Dynasty Fantasy Football. The last 2 days, I've forgotten the songs of the day. Hopefully you can cut me some slack on that. Once I get down to writing the analysis part, I get pretty deep into it, and my brain doesn't really come back out to the song part and the artistic part at times. But with that said, it will be a staple going forward. Your happy song of the day is Still Feels So Good by Twista, and the YouTube link is in the description of this podcast. The football song of the day is Trying to Find a Balance by Atmosphere. One thing I have actually been very surprised with is how few people, 0, have taken a $5 gamble just to see if my paid content and spreadsheets would help them in any way, and then unsubscribe before the month is out. But I guess I just underestimated how resistant people are to feeling like they've been scammed. But on that front, I have been focusing on creating this content, learning how to edit it, produce it, distribute it, market it, all those different things. But today, well, for me it's tomorrow, but when you're listening to this podcast, it'll be today. I'll really be trying to update that paid content, making it easier to understand, having user guides with it, possibly even some YouTube videos to explain what each piece does. I don't think I've really done a good job of that yet, but that is what happens when you're focused on making money in the long run, not the short term. But I do realize I need to show or explain the value more than just screenshots on a web page. So be looking for that. I'll be announcing the new changes both on this podcast and on Reddit and probably my other social media accounts once I decide I have the time to go learn how to use these things for essentially the first time. Again, I just wanted to say thanks for listening. Hope this content provided value and provoked thought for you today. You've been listening to Dynasty 365, where the film will set you free.
So much trouble, it's not my fault. All this, I also lose my friends, I lost my baby that was looking cry coolly today. Want to change, he wanted us so they could give try more like to feel. I'd kill the real, take your life in a second. The devil drinks coffee in my kitchen, I mentioned in every song, I just wanted to go away. You decide to stay in the well. I want to be forgiven, I don't like this kid for money. Sorry I was scared, you're not the way it feels. Like to sleep with it for someone to come in and kill you. The final thing didn't stop now. I'm not afraid of anything. Go they gonna kill anyone that feels so powerful. They trip by you, I read your skin up, everything is confusing. You will be good, but you will be more. You will be good, but you will be more. You will be good, but you will be more. Alone every day, it is a praise of pleasure.